Good afternoon, everyone. Shall we get started? My name is Felipe Rodrigues. I'm a professor of English at the University of Janeiro of the state of Rio de Janeiro. I'm here, I have the privilege to be here with my colleagues who are going to present today, who are Professor Eliza Araújo from Universidade Fluminense, Professor Cristina Pinto-Bailey, an independent scholar, and Joyce Fernandes from Brown University. Okay, thank you so much for being here, right? It is a pleasure to preside and to chair this panel dedicated to translating Black invisibility from Portuguese. Most of my colleagues are translators themselves, in addition to research the translation of Black literature from Portuguese into English and vice versa. Okay, so I'm going to introduce the first presenter this morning, who is Professor Araújo. She's a professor of English and literature at the Federal Fluminense University in Rio, and her presentation is entitled Black Women Poets in the Cadernos Negros of Today, Challenges in Writing and Translation. Eliza?
Thank you, Felipe. Good morning, everybody. So good morning one more time. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Felipe, for organizing this panel. It's a pleasure to share a little bit of this research with you all. So this is the title of this section of this research, Black Women Poets in the Cadernos Negros of Today, Challenges in Writing and Translation. And to start talking about Black Brazilian female poets today, it's important to have a little bit of context and understand where much of this work comes from, especially when dealing with Cadernos Negros, this specific type of anthology. So we need to highlight the legacy of the Movimento Negro Unificado that organized at the end of the 70s, and also this year of 1978 is really important because it's also the year of the launching of Cadernos Negros. And in 1981, a little later, there is the establishment of the group Langauge, a group of poets, writer, activists who got together and decided to self-publish, to publish authors, Black authors from around Brazil. It's important to say that from 1978 to this day, this publication has been coming up every year with collections of short stories by writers from all over Brazil and collections of poems as well. Another important thing to say is that the name of this collection, Cadernos Negros, pays tribute to Carolina Maria de Jesus, very important, internationally known Black woman writer from Brazil, who used to write on notebooks, scraps of paper, and was able to put together a very important body of work that we celebrate to this day. Cheryl Sterling is one of the researchers who also look at Quilomboji as a variation of the Black Arts movement. So this is also something I'm interested in investigating in this research. And I also intend to look at the articulation of Brazilianness, or in this poetic diction that these women produce. This is a photo of the launching of Cadernos Negros número 1. This is something Sterling says about this publication. The name is a combination of Quilombo, the name given to communities of runaway slaves who lived as free, and Hoje, which translates to today. The Quilombo as a space of resistance to enslavement and Portuguese hegemony stands as an evocative reminder of the courage, self-sufficiency, self-actualization, and organizing force of Afro-Brazilians. There have been 2 numbers that have been translated into English. These are the ones. And I'm focusing on the newer versions of the anthologies. So the portion of my work that I'm sharing today focuses on volume 43, which was published in 2020. Some interesting facts about this number. It has the biggest number of authors and pages. It's organized by Márcio Barbosa and Esmeralda Ribeiro, who are poets, were there from the beginning and still today are making this work possible. And it has the higher number of women in the history of the collection. There are 65 authors in this volume, 40 of them are women. More than 100 people worked in the process of selection, edition, proofreading, and launching. And it was finalized in the year that the pandemic hit Brazil. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to show some of my translations and talk a little bit about the process and the principles that orient this work. Of course, in some moments, there's going to be a focus on form and control of metrics, but also an attention to translating or recreating meanings that may carry a cultural resonance, and also the alternative or the space for the exercise of the right of opacity. The first poem I'm going to share with you is called The Drums, and this is how it goes. The drums live in me, life and power to my head, inside my chest, fruitful energy, unchained, in crescent moving ways. Fear vanishes when the rhythm dances in my ears and offers my soul ancestor songs of bliss and courage, songs of other black lives intertwined with mine by divine forces. From the drums they come, the mystery of dancing melodies, where the soul breathes and expands. In the moving vibrant scales, knowings flow in the hands of Alabish. The drums, the divine drums, settle sense into our ori, of black spirits alive in the shire. Black lives through time, joined by the beat of memories, where music lightens flames of Ashe, the breath of the Orishas weaving our souls. So one of the things that I've been noticing while carrying out this research is how how orality plays into the writing of Black women and what kind of tone that adds to the texts. Fernanda Felisberto says about this importance of orality in the writing of Black women. She says, "When I think of Afro-Brazilian female poetry, I realize it came into my life before my presence in academic spaces. My house, as well as the home of many Brazilian families, is absolutely musical. Alcione, Elza Soares, Clementina, Ivone Laro, Desi Brandão, Jovelina Pérola Negra, and so many others arrived way before my first steps onto theory, and I keep all of the verses and melodies close to my heart to this day." So this is the type of orality we're talking about here, and orality that may come from samba lyrics, from the practice of escrevivência, which Conceição Evaristo talks about and shares, is very present through the telling of stories. And I look at this orality as a Black female, a mark of this Black female aesthetic in poetry from these women. One important thing to highlight about this translation is how we can see very specific marks of this orality in this poem, making reference to the language of terreiros, de Candomblé in Brazil. So we have words like alabês, ori, xirê, axé, which have not been translated in an attempt to connect to that idea of opacity that Eliza defends, and also to show that this poetic diction, show how it is coming and how it is shown in the poems. I think I'm gonna go ahead so I can read more poems. And I also make this selection trying to show different styles and different ways in which this orality is being shown. The second poem by Lidiane Ferreira is entitled Polyglot, and this is how it goes. I found that I speak tongues while I sail through the currents of the mango tree. I suck whatever the sweetest in you. Chaste tongue, breaking into homes, mouth down, until the sky wraps up with you. This poem has a more an erotic tone. Its metaphors are involving this kind of connection between the self and nature in the act of touching another body for pleasure. And there's a number of references the lyrical self is making to language and the use of language, such as speaking tongues and approximations and oppositions between the idea of a pure or purity in language and the idea of desire, right? There is one interesting thing to highlight in this translation. It's the translation of mango tree, which comes from the word mangueira in Portuguese. And there's a bit of a semantic loss here because mangueira in Portuguese means the mango tree, but also a hose. So it's a closer reference to a body part that is being, that there is an allusion to in the poem. And in a sense, there is a bit of a loss here, but I try to think of it in terms of a tradução Exu, which is an elaboration by the Brazilian scholars Guilherme Gontijo Flores and André Capilé, where they defend that Exu is thought of as a force conducting the act of translation. And this may appear in many ways, as for example, questioning the mere linguistic transposition, presenting a critical reading in the act of translation. And so when making this choice that involves a loss, in this sense, a recreation of meaning is intended, in which the process of translation is viewed as a possibility of working with language in an intersection, encruzilhada, where creation is welcome and occasional disruptions may be a way of building alternatives for the effect and context. Unfortunately, I won't have time for the last poem. I can at least read it, right? There's 2 minutes, okay. It's called Expressionism by Benedita Lopes. This is how it goes. Girl sitting on the curb, the candy box by her side, indifferent to traffic, hands on the chin, wandering look, dismay. Forsaking oneself is almost a game, if not for the toil of days and days. The work overlapping study, the disagreement of destiny, expressionism. The color of the day is autumn, the girl is flower with no spring. So we have a text that is focused on the look on this girl's eyes, and there isn't a reference to expressionism here. and also an attempt to sort of paint a picture of what it means to, be in big urban centers in Brazil and see these children, approaching the cars in traffic and trying to sell candy, etc. But I can't get into it too much, but this is basically just a little bit to show what we've been working on, and I hope that this is an important contribution to for the poetry of Black Brazilian women to be known. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Araújo, for your talk, for your presentation. Now I'm going to invite Professor Cristina Pinto-Bailey to get here and to present about her work. Professor Pinto-Bailey is the translator of Maria Firmina dos Reis' book, Úrsula. And it is a great pleasure to have you here, Cristina, and to collaborate with you in this session. Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Felipe, for organizing this session and for my partners, etc., everybody here. So I'm talking about my translations of Cristina Sobral's fiction mostly, but some of her poems as well.
I'm sorry, is the microphone off, maybe?
Push the little green light.
E agora, melhorou?
Yes.
Tá bom? Okay. Various literary translators and scholars have written about the dismal U.S. editorial landscape regarding the ethnic diversity of authors published. For example, in January 2021, Eric Becker wrote in Words Without Borders about the large deficit of Black writers published each year, his words, in the United States. He cited research according to which 95% of the books published in the US between 1950 and 2018 were by white authors. The situation is even gloomier for foreign writers of color, specifically Black writers, those who write in English and those in translation, despite exceptions like Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and recent efforts by literary magazines and presses to publish more Black authors. And these efforts began, I think, with the Black Lives Matter movement, and especially after the killing of Breonna Taylor in March of 2020, and then George Floyd in May 2020. However, and I'm talking about these efforts began after a series of violent cases of racism, although as a good friend of mine would point out, all cases of racism are violent. However, those events really seem to wake up people in different segments of society, including the publishing industry, even if the results have been very slow. By results, I mean changes, improvements have been slow and few. Black Brazilian authors' position within their national or our national literary market is similar to their US counterparts, as research by Brazilian scholars has shown. Prior to the mid-20th century, few and isolated Black Brazilians made an appearance in the national literary canon, simply because their works were very often ignored or their identity whitened. After the late 1970s, and especially the past 25 years in the 21st century, it has become harder and harder to deny the existence of a robust and rich corpus of Black Brazilian literature. And main force behind this has been Cadernos Negros and Quilombos, right? But also, so the writers themselves, Black writers themselves have pushed and have achieved some very positive results. Also, the creation of presses like MLA and Nandiala that focus specifically on publishing Black writers from Brazil. So these initiatives have begun to reshape our literary canon, and some writers such as Conceição Evaristo have finally been published by what we call mainstream presses and received prestigious literary awards. And in addition, we could name a number of them, right? Besides Evaristo, Jefferson Tenório, Itamar Ferreira Jr., Ana Paula Maia, etc. Yet, their achievements and acclaim by critics and public still represent a small fraction of the significant number of outstanding Black authors whose work deserves similar recognition. Likewise, their numbers are minute among those published in English language translation, representing a slight part of an already small percentage of Brazilian literature available in English. And to that regard, we should mention, for those of you who don't know, the recent anthology published by University College in London, co-edited by Cida Salgueiro, who is here, and includes works and translations by you and works by Paulo Dutra, right? But the fact is that Portuguese is still a minor language in Brazilian literature, a minor literature within the World Republic of Letters. And if we begin to map out this republic, it's apparent that it constitutes an uneven playing field. The flux of cultural and literary influences follows the flux, obviously, of political influence from the hegemonic North to the global South. Yet, US Black critics like John Keane and Kayama Glover, both of whom are also literary translators, have argued for the importance of making Black authors from across the globe to be made available in translation to an African American readership. And Kayama Glover, she mentions how this is so fundamental because otherwise African American readers will get to know about Black experiences from other countries, in other countries, through the lenses of white writers or white scholars mostly. So if we focus on the Brazilian context, we'll find similar fluxes of influence shaping the panorama of our literature. And I'm talking here about the groups of our writers who achieve greater or lesser visibility nationally and internationally. In both scenarios, Cristina Sobral may be considered a minor writer despite her significant literary and artistic accomplishments. Born in Rio de Janeiro in 1974, since 1990 she has lived in Brasilia, where she has been active as an actor, poet, fiction writer, playwright, theater director, educator, and editor. And she has published like some 15 single-author books. Her fiction has appeared in Cadernos Negros, various anthologies at home and abroad. And in translation, she has some poems translated by John Keane have appeared in Words Without Borders, and some of her short stories, a few of her short stories, have appeared in my translation in a couple of journals in the US. However, Sobral finds the wide recognition she strives for and well deserves to be elusive, and has mentioned in conversations that she doesn't always get support from fellow writers and others in Brazil's literary ecosystem. My first encounter with Sobral's work was through her poetry, which I soon introduced to my language and literature classes. In 2019, I invited Sobral to do a bilingual reading at the university where I taught and to talk to my Portuguese students. in what turned out to be two very well attended events. And this was the beginning of our collaboration. My first translation of her work was Kinky Hair of Pichain. Pichain appeared in 2011 and the translation in 2021. And then in 2023, we presented Lavender Roses, Rosas Lilás, a bilingual reading at the annual Pan America Women Translation Series, reading series. And this can be found on YouTube if anybody is interested. As I have written before and stated in other talks, other conversations, translation is for me a source of pleasure and a challenge. I also see it as a political act, a form of activism. It began as an extension of my scholarly work and teaching, but soon I became more intentional about what I was doing. I no longer I no longer teach, and translation has replaced the classroom as my way of helping to bring visibility to Brazilian lit and to particularly to Black Brazilian writers. I don't rely on translation as a source of income. I have a little bit of my social security, and so I have translated mostly authors that I choose, that I have chosen. Writers with whom I have an affinity, whose works I find aspects of my personal and national identity. I don't want to sound disingenuous, naive, or blind. Sobral's skin color has marked her life experiences in radically different ways than mine, and my awareness of racism can't compare with her experience of it. But in Sobral's work, I've read an expression of my own otherness and sense of displacement, and most importantly, the stories and history of a large segment of Brazilian society whose experiences must be made visible. Even though I'm aware I have little or no power as a translator, translation is a powerful activity, for it stands up against the danger of silence. And these are Kayama Glover's words. She calls the silence or the invisibility, the subtle violence of no representation. On the other hand, the different racial identities of writer and translator bring up the question of who can translate whom, which has become a heated debate since the controversy surrounding the translations of Amanda Gorman's famous poem, The Hill Recline, to Dutch and to Catalan. There were problems there. Furthermore, a related urgent issue is that of the small number of translators of color, at least here in the US, and their own invisibility. So how does a translator who grew up with the privilege of being considered white in a country that has long denied its own racism approach the work of a Black writer like Sobral? Well, the brief answer is with solidarity, but also with sensitivity and respect for the author's voice and subjectivity. And also respect for the social context in which the texts were written. So, of course, my having taught for so many years, I always addressed issues of gender, race in my class, versus, and then my research and my reflection on racism in Brazil and US have helped this. But also what has helped my translation of Sobral is the collaboration that we have been able to do together. And this collaboration, I don't know, Felipe, maybe we can do the second please. This collaboration has been very, very helpful, particularly when translating works such as her story Daforim, a Nebo, for her title is different than mine. Daforim é boa para os ventres adoecidos, which is translated as Daforim, an oblation for wounded wombs. The protagonist is writing a letter, And in this letter, we need to, she addresses her two mothers, her biological black mother, her adoptive white mother, which actually is very autobiographical. And then she has many words relating to Black Brazilian or Afro-Brazilian religions. So I was able to talk to her personally, and she told me about certain terms, etc. Especially she told me about her own religious beliefs. So it was very helpful for me to understand the terms, the practices, the beliefs behind those. And here you just have some examples. More about assentamento, we talked about that, body, and ago. And one thing I'll mention to finish off is that I chose not to italicize any of these words. When I translate stuff now, I do not italicize words that I find that in this case, Portuguese words, right, or Brazilian Portuguese words. Rather, I assume that English language writers will know words like orixá, and in other cases I gloss, like in the last example here, I ask for a go, always give me a go, give me permission to go on. So that glossing hopefully would help the reader understand what I was talking about.
Thank you so much, Professor Pinto-Bailey, for your great presentation about the translation of Christian Sobral. So now we are going to continue the conversation about translating Black authors from Portuguese into English. I'm going to show my slides here, hopefully. So we are talking about the technology. Translation is a technology, you know that, right? So we are getting to grips with technology, of course. It's also a challenge. Oh, right. It's always a challenge. Okay, so let me repeat the title of my presentation today, which is Retranslating Blackness at the Crossroads of Language. This presentation, of course, is part of a larger project, research and translation project, focused on translating the works of Black women writers from Portuguese into English and vice versa. Today, I will explore how Cristina da Silva's works historicize Black experiences in Brazil, engage with Afro-diasporic perspectives, and present challenges and opportunities for translation into English, particularly by eliciting new modes of expression and thinking. Cristina da Silva was born in 1967 in Belo Horizonte, Minas Gerais. A trained historian, she weaves her academic expertise into her creative writing, establishing herself as a chronista who seamlessly blends essays and narrative forms. It is a challenge for us to translate what a chronica is into English, right? And that's the genre, that's her favorite genre. That's the genre in which she shines. As such, da Silva positions herself within the literary tradition of Machado de Assis and modernist writers such as Carlos Drummond de Andrade and Fernando Sabino. We know that both of them wrote chronicas. However, her narratives go beyond social commentary, chronicling an Afro-diasporic ancestral version of her story. In Benjaminian terms, we could say that her short stories, quote, brush history against the grain, unquote, with Os Nove Pentes da África, the title of one of her books, encapsulating the complexities of the intimacy between among black people. In her issue in Nova York, da Silva intertwines African-derived ancestral knowledge with contemporary narratives, especially by centralizing Eshu, the Yoruba deity who represents the dynamic and multifaceted aspects of Afro-Brazilian spirituality and cultural identity. This book of short stories was awarded the Prêmio da Biblioteca Nacional, Brazil's National Library Award, in the short stories category in 2019. As the God without boundaries, Eshu serves as a symbolic connection between Africa and its diaspora. In its blurry boundaries, the volume explores the fluidity of racialized space beyond national borders, with stories set in diverse localities, including New York streets, a dangerous hill, a funeral, an artist's studio, and, of course, the crossroads, as encruzilhadas. Each setting reflects pivotal moments: fear and humanity, spiritual retribution, personal empowerment, societal defiance, and mystical generosity. Through these narratives, da Silva portrays history as a living entity, shaped by dynamic Afro-diasporic cultures. Her work embodies the interconnectedness of existence, as emphasized by Eliza Martins, who describes Afro-Brazilian thought as deeply rooted in ancestral epistemology. That is, the foundational principle that, quote, interconnects everything that exists in the cosmos, unquote. If the practice of translation is inherently political, considering the choices translators make, we could underscore the potential of black literatures in translation to disrupt structural racism. As John King asserts, translating non-Anglophone black authors is crucial for understanding the complexities of African diaspora. He states, were more black voices translated, we would have a clearer sense of the connections and commonalities, as well as the differences across the African diaspora, and better understand an array of regional, national, and hemispheric issues. End of quotation. Karina Tantaris introduces anti-racist translational strategies, such as employing racialized English to confront white normative linguistic standards, and selecting texts that undermine racist stereotypes. Giving priority to translating modes of blackness, my translational approach of Cidinha da Silva's short stories foregrounds the agency of black literature translators. Translating da Silva's work involves understanding that linguistic decisions demand ideological considerations. Da Silva's short stories are a powerful intervention in the discursive expression of black thought. Assuming that discourses are historically constituted bodies of knowledge and practice that shape people, giving position of power to some but not to others, as Paulo said, and that discourses can only exist in social interaction in specific situations, I read Cidinha da Silva's narratives as disruptive acts in the face of racism. Consequently, my translation respects the speech of a black woman writer who combines activism and creativity with intellectual production, generating what Carol Boyce Davis calls transformational discourses. The short stories were rendered into English from Africanized Portuguese, which is a dominant mark of Brazilian, from Africanized Portuguese, which is a dominant mark of the Portuguese we speak in Brazil. The influence of African languages on Brazilian Portuguese modified the colonizer's language so profoundly that it evolved into what Lélia Gonzalez theorized as Portuguese, a portmanteau of black, preto, and Portuguese, Portuguese. Other scholars, such as Lieda Pessoa de Castro, demonstrate that the African influence on Brazilian Portuguese is visible in the vowel-rich pronunciation of our speech, our syntax, and the preference for processes, for example. Meilhomes notes thousands of African origin words in Brazilian Portuguese. As Gonzalez argued, it was up to Mãe Preta, as a subject supposed to know, to Africanize the Portuguese spoken in Brazil, Portuguese, as Lusophone Africans say, and consequently to Africanize Brazilian culture itself. End of quotation. Therefore, Portuguese, an Afro-Brazilian linguistic phenomenon, transforms Brazilian Portuguese through African influences, serving as a powerful mode of expressing blackness in Brazil. Da Silva's elegant and ironic language is couched in Portuguese or Portuguese phrases such as mais old-fashioned que o meu, meus dreads, Harlem Roots, a comida do homem, tocou o dendê, na gringa, as irmãs da média, o juremeiro, nome de preto, é bom fast food, tambor mineiro, povo da rua, em cruzas sagradas, Inoma, etc. Her characters are also named with a Portuguese style, incorporating references to the Orishas, Exu and his metonymy Boca do Mundo, and also Yansan, as it said, filha de Yansan. But also in ingenious reinvention of names, exemplified by Mérgia, Marçulena, Mirizante, Mortuária, and Múrcia. As these names are fictional and serve as tropes and narratives, I believe that their recreation in English conveys a similar effect to the reader of Cidinha, to the reader as Cidinha achieves in Portuguese. My translation offers versions of the names in English to reflect Da Silva's irony when she originally invented them to make cognitive demands on Lusophone readers. In addition to a vivid Afro-diasporic vocabulary worthy of its own glossary, Da Silva deploys creative syntax that resonates with Portuguese in double negation, such as não precisava de outros, não, ritualistic verb phrases such as preparar a comida do homem, fazer o caminho, clamei pelo boca do mundo, laroyer. German verb phrases and their pronunciation by inference exemplified in, and I will pronounce it the way it's supposed to be pronounced in my home state, Minas Gerais. Eu querendo ir, e a família insistindo para eu ficar, e eu ficando. The ubiquitous use of the conjunction e, the contraction of the second person singular pronoun se, which is also very common in Minas, right? That's how we speak. Você vai lá, você tá aqui, você, right? Any mineiros? Of course, yeah, there you go. And the resultative construction illustrated by Dio Errado. How to translate the potency of such black expression into English? Faced with the Portuguese language blackened by Da Silva's hands, my translation sought, whenever possible, a comparison with another form of black language, such as African American Vernacular English, AAVE, understood as the US black community's signature structure system of meaning and interpretation, according to Henry Gates and Lisa Green. assuming that translation does not happen in a vacuum, but in a continuum, and that it is not an isolated act. It is part of an ongoing process of intercultural transfer, as Susan Nesnet and Trivedi tell us. At the very outset, I had to formulate translational strategies aimed at recreating the rhythm, cultural references, and expressive nuances inherent in the Silva's Portuguese. Here you can see some examples of my translation. This is just a sample, some sort of what we call in Portuguese, aperitivo, right? An appetizer, right? For you to see, this approach included maintaining the double negation, ritualistic verb phrases, and unique syntactical elements that mirror certain linguistic patterns found in AAVE. Incorporating choice turns of phrase associated with AAVE, I am to racialize the Silva's literary discourse in translation, particularly in the vibrancy and specificity of references to Afro-Brazilian culture, ensuring that the translated text resonated with the same depth and richness of the source text. By employing these techniques, my translation strives to honor the source text's black voice and convey its cultural impact to Anglophone audiences. This rendition ensures that the Silva's narratives continue to inspire and educate, fostering meaningful global dialogues on race, history, and language, while reinforcing the transformative power of her storytelling. In New York City, the city that births the crossroads of the world, Cidinha da Silva narrates her stories of Exu, the master of the crossroads who connects texts with contexts, Africa with its diaspora, and signification with translation. As a Yoruba-derived axiom informs us, Exu embodies duality, transformation, and the fluidity of meaning, reminding us that every translational decision opens paths and closes others. Exu matou pássaro ontem com a pedra que jogou hoje. Exu killed a bird yesterday with a stone he threw today. And here is the cover image of Absinthe, a journal of world literature and translation, a journal dedicated, an issue dedicated to contemporary Brazilian literature, with the translation of my dear colleague, Professor Pinto-Bailey, and it features my translation of Da Silva's work. That is it. Laroye. Thank you. Now I'm going to invite the next presenter today, last but not least, Joyce Silva Fernandes. She's a PhD candidate at Brown University. The title of her presentation is Writing as Translation in Short Stories by Lilia Montet and Paulina Shiziani.
Thank you, Felipe. Thank you for organizing this session. Thank you, my colleagues. So this is a little bit from my dissertation project that's ongoing. So I welcome any criticism and suggestion. I'm currently working on the final chapter of my dissertation, and this is what I'm focusing on right now. My dissertation is about African women's short fiction in Portuguese, and I'm working with 10 different authors. But today I will focus on the aspects of translation in the works of Mozambican writers Eliza and Paulina Chiziane. And I'd like to start with Chiziane's words on language. In an interview with scholar Michelle Labin, she stated the following. My origins and my trajectory have meant that I have had contact with 3 languages and that I speak a type of Portuguese, Portuguese, for Black, and Portuguese. My Portuguese is different from that of academics. It is different from the Portuguese of other Black people who have been assimilated into Portuguese, who have spoken Portuguese since childhood. I belong to another Portuguese-speaking group. For me, the use of Portuguese languages in writing is a major dilemma. Drawing from the African usage of the term Portuguese, Eliza Gonzalez, as Felipe mentioned, theorized the concept to describe the Africanization of the Portuguese spoken in Brazil. Gonzalez explains how the Black mother subtly transmitted elements of the African culture to white Brazilians through storytelling in the form of passive resistance. She emphasizes the distinct features of Brazilian Portuguese, such as its unique tone and rhythm, the omission or alteration of certain consonant sounds, and vocabulary with roots in African languages like Kimbundu. As a hybrid of European Portuguese and African languages, versions of Portuguese, as indicated by Chiziane and Gonzalez, constitute acts of self-assertion, whether conscious or unconscious. In African literature, its use becomes a deliberate stylistic choice revealing the author's ideological stance, as discussed by Kenyan writer and scholar Ngugi wa Thiong'o. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing names here. In his seminal work, Decolonizing the Mind, The Politics of Language in African Literature, he argues that, and I quote, the choice of language and the use to which language is put is central to Africans' natural and social environment. This choice profoundly shapes African literature, as writers often view the act of writing as a form of translation. Mozambican writer Lydia Mouplin reflects on the challenges of translating her thoughts and ideas into what she considers a foreign language. The Portuguese language is a language that is not very widespread either. Translation is difficult, so the person makes an effort. Because I am a writer who suffers a lot to write, the sentences do not come to me. I do it, then scratch it off, then I scratch it off again, then I write it on the typewriter. Something else appears. For Thiong'o, writing in a European language perpetuates the subjugation colonizers imposed on Africans. In contrast, writing in African languages becomes an act of resistance, contributing to anti-imperialist and decolonization efforts. Language as a repository of collective memory, culture, and values is crucial for identity formation and making sense of individual and communal experiences. In this context, adapting multilingual oral stories and histories into written form, for instance, becomes an essential intercultural communication process. It allows African writers to reclaim the foreign language as part of their rightful heritage and wield it to their advantage. Drawing from the concept of writing as translation, I view African women's authors' innovative use of language as a defining characteristic of their work. As Paul Bandia and Kwaku Gyazi argue, the act of writing for African authors is inherently an act of translation. From a post-colonial perspective, Bill Ashcroft refers to this process of linguistic transformation as inner translation, enabling African writers to operate between languages while maintaining their cultural expression. Similarly, Felipe employs the term ethnotextual mental translation to describe the cognitive process by which African writers translate their cultural and social contexts into a foreign language. Intercultural writing and the concept of writing as translation involve a movement between cultures, transferring African social-cultural realities into European languages. This process yields an Africanized variety of these languages, or varieties, I would say, resulting in hybrid or Creole forms such as Portuguese that allow writers, or forms of Portuguese, that allows writers to articulate African world senses. This stylistic choice establishes a middle ground that blurs the distinctions between original and translated work, and between source and receiving languages, cultures, texts. Writers such as Lydia Monplay and Paulina Chiziane have encountered a way to de-Lusophone the Portuguese language by disrupting standard norms, incorporating lexicon, expressions, and proverbs from African languages, while employing stylistic devices that recreate African oral storytelling techniques into written form. By decentering the European language, these writers have also redefined the role of the formerly colonized subject, positioning themselves within a broader anti-colonial and decolonial movement that resisted the stylistic and linguistic norms imposed by colonial and imperial powers. In their exercise of interpreting and portraying colonial and post-colonial tensions, they challenged the institutional authority of the colonial language, making it more flexible and better suited to their unique social, historical, and cultural realities. As intricate literary forms embedded in local, collective, and individual linguistic, social, historical, and cultural specificities, their texts pose significant challenges for retranslation, or what Kulbandia called post-writing in other languages. Paulina Chiziane has 12 translated works, or 12 works in translation, but only 2 of them are in English. So Nikechi, A Tale of Polygamy, and The Joyful Cry of the Partridge, both translated by David Brookshaw. The Joy Cry of the Partridge was actually just published in 2024. Lydia Monplay's stories have been featured in various short story collections, but her only full-length book in English is the novella Neighbors, translated by Richard Bartlett. Translations of the short stories in my corpus were either published in anthologies or featured in online translation and literary journals. For this presentation specifically, I will comment briefly on 2 of them. David Brookshaw's translation of Paulina Chiziane's story Mutola, and Richard Bartlett's translation of O Baile de Celina by Lydia Monplay. Brookshaw's translation stems from the latest version of Chiziane's story, which was published in Brazil. The first one was published in Mozambique. And Chiziane made considerable changes to this edition to be published in Brazil, including expanded dialogues, more direct and straightforward phrasing. These revisions have an influence in the translation by reducing some of the challenges related to the complex metaphors and intricate lexical and grammatical structures present in the first version. Nevertheless, Chiziane's text still presents difficulties, such as inverted word order by placing subjects in the middle of or end of sentences. Additionally, her use of oral storytelling elements, descriptions of local traditions, and historical references create a mythical atmosphere around the protagonist's story that exacerbates the difficulty to maintain the mythical atmosphere in translation. To address these challenges, Brookshaw has opted for a more domesticating translation in Lawrence Venucci's terms. Consequently, the translator adapted sentences and expressions for clarity using standard English word order and made several additions for clarification. In several instances, let me show you some of this. So this is Mutola. She is the most successful athlete in Mozambique to this day. And the story is basically her biography, but it puts her in this mythical position. She's compared to an eagle, and she is also compared to the great people of the country, such as Edouard Mondlane. So here's just an example of one sentence that got a little bit longer and more with more clarification. So I'm going to skip a little bit so I don't take too long. Adapting sentences or expressions in translation often involves replacing culturally specific elements from the author's context with those more familiar to readers of the receiving language. However, certain adaptations can simplify or alter the tone for a specific message. For example, in this sentence, na vitória das mulheres reside a desonra dos homens. Gisele alludes to how Mutala's success in a sport traditionally dominated by men challenges their sense of masculinity. Yet the phrase also serves as a broader critique of man whose honor depends on women's defeat and carries a proverbial resonance. Brugschau's translation, a woman's victory signifies man's dishonor, loses this proverbial aspect and shifts the impact of Chiziani's original phrasing. In Chiziani's narrative, Mutala progresses from an ostracized young girl passionate about soccer to a celebrated elite athlete, akin to Mozambique's greatest heroes. While the story predominantly unfolds in the past tense, Chiziani's description of Mutala as she gazes skyward holding her country's flag shifts to the present tense, as does her symbolic transformation into an eagle soaring toward Zulwini, or the Olympus. This use of the present tense creates a suspended moment, positioning Mutala as an enduring national legend with a legacy that still resonates in the present and will continue in the future. Brugschau, however, opts to maintain past tense throughout, creating a linear temporal flow that downplays the scene's timeless mythic quality. I'll move on to the second story. Lilian Montplay's O Baile de Celina, translated by Richard Bartlett, has appeared in 3 different collections of African stories. These are some of the examples I got from the story. And Bartlett's translation, or rather his multiple translations of Montplay's story, exemplifies the translator's continuous process, revealing a movement that alternates between fidelity to and divergence from the source text. I have based my analysis in the latest publication, referring to the previous ones, particularly the first version whenever it was necessary, especially to show the evolution of the translation. So, in the story O Baile de Celina, Montplay tells of a young woman preparing for her graduation ceremony. Montplay's writing is clear and straightforward, yet elaboratively descriptive, offering insights into the cultural and historical context that underpins the story. She incorporates a few local expressions, geographic references, and several markers of class and race, which amplify her critique of colonialism's enduring legacy. Bartlett's translation diverges from Montplay's original narrative from the outset, altering both the title and the time frame. So in the original, as O Baile de Celina, the ball was rendered as a banquet. So the title of the story in English is Celina's Banquet, not Celina's prom or ball or anything like that. And in the text, he switches to a metric banquet. Metric dances are common in South African tradition, but incomparable but not equivalent to North American proms or balls in Mozambique. As such, the translators attempt to anchor the event in an African cultural context does not necessarily align with the events as Montplay depicted them in the 1950s Mozambican landscape. Moving on. Yes, that time's up. Yeah, so I'm sorry. I'm just gonna go to the last paragraph I have here. So by examining Chiziani and Montplay's stories alongside their translations, I have intended to highlight the complex interplay between cultural and linguistic translation, between writing and translation and post-writing translation. As other African women writers, Chiziane and Montplan incorporate oral literature and African storytelling techniques into European mediums, modifying the language to reflect their own linguistic and cultural backgrounds. By subverting established social, literary, and linguistic conventions, these authors challenge norms and reshape literary tradition in Portuguese. As a result, their literature is inherently hybrid, reflecting the diversity of African realities. In the translation of their stories into English, Bartlett and Brooktrot both tend to navigate the challenging terrain of linguistic cultural differences in that through adaptation, additions, subtly reshaping characters' tone and narrative flow. These modifications can both enhance and dilute certain cultural markers, impacting readers' perceptions differently. After all, every translation is an interpretive act that enriches but also inevitably alters the text. This process speaks to the dynamic nature of storytelling across languages and cultures and emphasizes the need for increased understanding of African women's literature. It also demonstrates the urgency of approaching the specificities of their texts from a decolonial perspective that is both respectful of their work and disruptive of persisting colonial and imperial translation practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce, for your presentation. Now, I would like to invite you to continue the conversation by sharing your thoughts, your questions, and comments. Yes, Krista.
Thank you all for fascinating presentations. It was really interesting. I think I appreciate how all of you are thinking of translation in many ways as a political act and as a sort of act of activism, and really trying to reshape the dichotomies that have existed and sort of inequalities that have existed within the fields of translation and publication. One question that I had, and especially this is for the three of you that are really acting and practicing as translators, and Joyce, maybe you're also doing your own translations, maybe you'll possibly contribute, but you were mentioning this idea, and Felipe, you were talking about the ideas of the African-American vernacular English, and thinking, and I guess a question I have is, are you reading contemporary writers in English to sort of inform how you're thinking about the use of it? Because the use of like overusing things like "e" or "out," the sort of things can come across also as stereotypical or sort of can create other sorts of images, even though it is, vernacular. So I guess, how are you trying to navigate that tension? And create a right balance where you're capturing the orality, the sort of specificity of Portuguese, but you're not verging into something that could be, to an English reader, might come across as stereotypical or undermining sort of intelligence. And so just really curious to think of more your process.
I'll say very briefly, I am very I feel very uneasy going into the Afro-American vernacular English precisely because of that. I don't want, maybe because I am deemed a white translator, I think I would try to avoid the stereotypes. And yes, I read a lot of Black writers from the US all the time. Yeah.
I was just the same type of a question I had. Felipe, you had an example where you said black don't crack. Você tomar banho no formal. I think that's what it was. And I was thinking, for me, I live in the South, the story of Tar Baby. To me, that might have been a chance to incorporate the folk and how we talk about, oh, you're a tar baby, or you, because in my mind, that raises the images of the Tar Baby story and the use of Tar Baby in the Black vernacular more so than Black don't crack, because isn't that phrase literally, you took a bath in formal? And
Yeah, of course, yeah, that's.
so it's something black that you bathed in and see tar baby.
Yeah, we try not to be literal, at least in my practice, yeah, that's the.
No, I know you're not literal, but
Yeah.
to me, black don't crack, tar baby is not literal.
Yeah, no, of course not.
But it's
exactly.
kind of,
Yeah, of course not.
kind of gets that sense of you touched,
Yeah.
what you do. Stick
Exactly.
yourself to, and it kind of goes in with how black folk enters into black American literature. I was just thinking about your choice there, but I
Yeah.
know not the literal.
Yeah, I take full responsibility for my translation, and you're absolutely right. But the thing is, the step that we must take must be, as a translator, must be political.
Yes.
And the thing is, I've been reading African American literature, throughout my academic career. But the thing is, I'm a Brazilian, I'm an Afro-Brazilian. I'm a black person, a black man, and that's how I translate texts. It has to resonate some of the texts that I've read, some of the language that I've been exposed to. And I love your comment, Rhonda, because I am here to learn. There's this word in Portuguese that I use with my students. We talk about this all the time. That is letramento racial. That's what we need to do. It means racial education, right? We have to educate ourselves, right, when it comes to another culture, whatever culture it is, and when it comes to black cultures, Afro-diasporic cultures. This is something that we learn every single day. So, yeah, some of my translations are shared with other people, other black people, and especially people who, of course, can read that translation and can criticize and can provide feedback.
But I wanted to understand is, Toma Banho, is that a way of beautification? Is that where you came up with the translation? Because I didn't understand that Toma Banho, is that a good
Oh,
thing?
it's a good thing. It's a good thing. Yes, it's a good thing.
Because
It
the
means that
black
in Cidinha da Silva short story, specifically speaking, it is a good thing. It means that that person is young, is forever young.
But that is black don't crack. So I saw that as touching and being as something that would change your look. But you're seeing that as a compliment that, hey, you look good all the time. So I'm just trying to understand that phrase in Portuguese to go with what I know of African American vernacular in terms of transformation of how you look.
Yeah. And that's interesting because the narrator is a posthumous man, and he's describing what's going on from the coffin, right? Yeah, and that's how it is.
That works. That works. Thank you.
Okay, Matt,
I
who said that? Who raised that? Okay, you.
You were first.
Yes.
So I have a question for all of you, but specifically for Cristina. In terms of the translation process, you talked about collaborating with Cristina Sobral and maybe negotiating meaning on certain words and phrases. I'm wondering how that compared to your process with Ursula, or of course you're not able to, and so how that, if it affected at all your confidence in the translation of Ursula versus these Cristina Sobral stories, just talk a little more about that.
Well, I had done some translations before, translated Ursula, but I think Ursula gave me a lot of confidence, and I was very fortunate to have not a colleague and dear friend with whom I could, what is the word?
Dialogue with.
Yeah, I was thinking of some metaphorical image, which I can't remember what it was. But that process also, because it was a whole novel, it gave me a lot of confidence. Also, after Ursula, I started translating a novel by Maria Valéria Rezende. I was getting confident. Maria Valéria Rezende, and I workshopped my translation with different people. And those things, ending with Maria Valéria Rezende, I also had to chose to use many words in Portuguese, specifically vernacular used in the Northeast. So I think all those things prepared me, but I think conversations, and I have to thank my companheiro Paulo Dutra for many conversations we've had about literature and life or whatever. Yeah. I don't know. Is that-
Great, thank you.
Yeah. But I wanted to. I know, right?
Five.
I've always been like this. It's not my old age, but now I'm worse and I have the license to do it. But I just wanted to mention regarding the use of or African American vernacular English, a novel by Percival Everett, Erasure. It's much better, much deeper than the movie that they made, and it's very worth
But I
reading.
think it gets to the question of like of verging into something, of how he's making the satire of it. So I was thinking, as I was reading your example, I was thinking of that novel a bit and thinking, how do you make that balance between what he's doing as the satire of the vernacular and what is actually what we're trying to reproduce a type of reality.
And I think it goes right on to the point of how the white reading, editorial ecosystem stereotypes and freezes writers, creators in certain categories.
Okay. So I have three questions for three families. They'll be kind of brief. And most of it is just to get a better idea of kind of what you feel. I've done I did a lot of translations for my first book from Spanish to English. But I do it, I kind of theorize as I go. So this was interesting, to see people who are doing it, who are reading theorists and whatnot. And the notion of a shoe as a translator, I guess, and more is also interesting to me. She was everywhere in Brazil. She was everywhere in Brazil. But I wanted to know what was the casos de histórias que você mencionou. You mentioned Malay, and you mentioned a couple of others.
Nandiala,
I'm sorry?
Nandiala, Nandyal, Balas,
Massa, yeah. Massa,
Okay.
M-A-Z-A.
M-A-W?
Double Z A.
Double C.
Oh,
Z.
W-Z-A. Ah, W-Z-A, okay.
And of course, come on,
Malay, I'm familiar with, yeah.
pardon, Malay.
I'm familiar with Malay, yeah. Then also I wanted to ask, muito rápido, essa pergunta sobre essa expressão que eu vi muitas vezes lá no Brasil. Exu matou pássaro ontem com a pedra que jogou hoje. Is that um ditado brasileiro, or is that that's something a writer said? Is that
It's an
something
African saying.
Yeah.
So is
African
that
saying.
more Yoruba?
Yes, it's a
Okay.
Yoruba saying, yeah.
Okay.
And it's repeated in Brazil, as you said. Yeah.
Okay, okay, I'm curious about that.
Even in a capoeira,
Yeah,
part,
I'm curious about that.
exactly.
That's tied to the last question that I have actually for Joyce. It's Joyce Fernandes, right?
Joyce.
Joyce Fernandes. One of the project that I'm working on right now seeks to think through ethics of Black manhood and sexuality in Brazil in the 15th century. And I think that in order to do such a thing, that historical documentation is useful, but that one needs to tap into an epistemology that precedes violent colony of Brazil, Portuguese colony of Brazil. And so I'm looking towards Angola. So when I heard you speak about Mozambique, I asked myself, how did she acquire, tap into, become familiar with, bathe herself in knowledge of this Mozambican oral tradition? If we even want to call it Mozambican, because perhaps it's ethnically defined. This is what I've done thus far. I came across a dictionary, which is kind of an Kimbundu dictionary that is Kimbundu Portuguese. It appears, I don't use Kimbundu, but it appears to be very intricate. The information translations are good. For some strange reason, it has no date on it. It appears that Anglo produced it. I think I know who produced it, the Anglo produced it. And then I've also come across two collections of proverbs that I came across. I said it's gonna be brief, it's not brief, so we'll have to talk a little bit more later. But I'm curious how you went about it. Maybe if you want to talk about it, because it seems to me that it would be irresponsible to kind of grab whatever you can find, you know. I wanted something a little bit more systematic. I'm really impressed when I look at the proverbs coming out of very African traditions. They're really extraordinary. So that's, I don't know if we can talk about it later, or if you want to talk about it now. So I can actually,
We can definitely talk about it later a little bit more, but I can give you a quick answer about what I've been attempting to do. One of the things that I'm really focused on is what these writers have to say, not only in their writing, but personally in their interviews and when they share things about their writing and about their personal history. And what they believe to be the source of their writing. So and then I go after these sources. So one of the things that Paulina Chiziani always says is that she's not a feminist. And working only with women in my dissertation, the first thing that I thought was go after feminist theories. But if she's not a feminist, and how can I approach that? And one of the things that she says is that if you want to learn anything about an African female author, you have to learn about African women in general. You have to learn about the history of African women. So then I went after the history, because if we think about the history, the colonial history in general, it's right there, but the colonial history is not written by African women. So that's the first thing that I did. I wanted to go after African women, and I started from there.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry to say we have to finish, right? Because people are there. Please join me. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Great job. I really love this. I'm looking forward to